Ancient kings ruled not with a sword, but with a controlled river. The forgotten engineers who mastered this power were the true architects of civilization, and their story is one of the most overlooked in human history. By the end of this journey, you will understand the secret connection between water and political power that built the world's first great kingdoms. How did a network of canals determine who wore the crown? What happened to the brilliant minds who designed these systems, only to vanish from the record? We are about to piece together a legacy written in water and stone, from the deserts of Persia to the floodplains of Mesopotamia. This is the story of how humanity's greatest ambition was to command the flow of a river. What do you think is the most important resource for building a lasting society? The first great transformation began not in palaces, but in the mud. Along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, our ancestors made a profound discovery. They learned that the very floods that threatened their homes could also be their greatest provider. By digging simple ditches to guide the water and building low earthen walls to contain it, they turned chaos into control. This was the birth of irrigation, a quiet revolution that allowed wild grains to become dependable crops and nomadic bands to become settled villages. This shift created a surplus of food, and with that surplus, everything changed. Society itself began to reorganize around the management of water. This idea is known as the hydraulic hypothesis, where the fundamental need for large-scale, coordinated irrigation demanded a new kind of leadership. Someone had to plan the canals, organize the labor to dig them, and settle disputes over water rights. From this necessity, the first centralized authorities emerged, along with the world's first social hierarchies. The simple act of directing water flow laid the foundation for state power. We see this clearly with the Sumerians. Their earliest writings and myths are filled with references to canals, which they viewed as the lifeblood of their world. Their gods were often depicted as great engineers commanding the waters. What started as a community digging a ditch evolved into the first organized public works, projects so vast they required the coordination of thousands. This was the dawn of hydraulic civilization, a revolution born from the relationship between humanity and a river. The power to command water became the first real blueprint for building a kingdom. The blueprint for a kingdom was etched directly into the earth. Across the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, a sprawling network of canals transformed the landscape into a geometric marvel. This was not a haphazard collection of ditches, but a carefully planned hydraulic system, the cardiovascular system of the world's first true cities. Canals crisscrossed the land for hundreds of miles, channeling life-giving water from the great rivers to fields of barley and date palms. This engineering feat enabled populations to soar, supporting dense urban centers like and Uruk, where tens of thousands of people lived, worked, and thrived in what was once a challenging environment. The true genius of these forgotten engineers lay in their control. They devised sluice gates made of wood and stone to precisely regulate the flow, opening them to nourish distant fields or closing them to prevent destructive flooding. They built weirs, low dams that raised water levels to feed the higher elevation canals. This was water management with a degree of foresight and precision that would be impressive in any era. But such monumental projects demanded more than technical skill. They required an unprecedented level of social organization. To build and maintain this vast network required a massive, coordinated labor force, effectively creating some of the world's first bureaucracies. Scribes meticulously recorded allocations of grain for workers, while overseers managed the complex schedules for digging and dredging. This was the administrative machinery of the state, and it was born from the need to control water. This connection between water and power was so fundamental it was codified into law. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest written legal systems, contains specific laws pertaining to canals and water rights. A farmer who was negligent and allowed his field to flood a neighbor's could be held liable. This was not a minor regulation. It was a recognition that the entire social and economic order depended on the careful, fair distribution of water. The ability to reliably feed a city was the ultimate source of a king's legitimacy. His power was not just proclaimed from a throne, it was demonstrated by the water flowing through the canals and the grain growing in the fields. The legacy of these Mesopotamian masters set a powerful precedent, a lesson in statecraft written in water and earth that every aspiring empire would later study. While Mesopotamia engineered control, Egypt mastered harmony. The Nile Valley presented a different kind of puzzle, one where the river itself provided a perfect, predictable rhythm. Each year, the Nile would swell with the summer rains from distant highlands, flooding its banks and depositing a layer of incredibly fertile black silt across the land. This annual event, the inundation, was the heartbeat of Egypt, but it was a heartbeat that needed careful monitoring. Too little floodwater meant drought and famine. Too much meant destructive, village-sweeping floods. The challenge was not to force the river into submission, but to dance perfectly to its ancient, life-giving tune. Egyptian engineers developed an elegant solution known as basin irrigation. They constructed vast, shallow basins across the floodplain, surrounded by strong earthen banks. As the Nile rose, they would channel the silt-rich water into these basins through a series of canals, then seal the inlets, trapping the water and the precious sediment inside. The water would stand for weeks, soaking the earth deeply before being drained away to reveal land ready for planting. This was a system of capture and release, a passive form of engineering that worked with the river's natural cycle rather than fighting against it. The key to this entire system was a simple yet profound piece of technology, the Nilometer. These were stone staircases or calibrated columns built into the riverbank, designed with exquisite precision to measure the Nile's height. But a Nilometer was far more than a measuring stick. It was a state secret and a potent political tool. The priesthood, acting on the pharaoh's behalf, guarded these structures closely. The annual reading was an event of national importance. A perfect measurement promised a bumper harvest and national prosperity. A reading that was too high or too low signaled impending hardship. This is where hydraulic control became divine right. The pharaoh's authority was not just political, it was cosmological. He was considered the living embodiment of the god Horus, the intermediary between the gods and the people. His primary duty was to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, balance, and justice. A successful inundation, predicted and managed through his wisdom, was the ultimate proof that he was upholding Ma'at. It demonstrated his divine connection and his ability to ensure the Nile's bounty. Conversely, a series of poor floods could shatter that perception, suggesting the gods were displeased and that the pharaoh's power was failing. The Nilometer's reading was therefore a direct report card on the pharaoh's legitimacy. This symbiotic relationship between the river's rhythm and royal power created one of the most stable and enduring civilizations in human history. For 3,000 years, the system held. The Egyptian approach demonstrates a profound truth that understanding a river's natural character could be a more powerful form of control than attempting to dominate it completely. While others fought their rivers, the Egyptians listened, and in doing so, built a kingdom that seemed as eternal as the Nile itself. Yet another civilization was mastering rivers, but in a way so different it still puzzles us today. Far to the east, in the vast floodplains of the Indus River, a society emerged that seemed to channel its genius inward into the very streets of its cities. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were marvels of utilitarian design, with wide, grid-like streets and buildings made of uniformly sized bricks. But their true masterpiece lay beneath the surface, a hidden network of water and waste management so advanced it would not be rivaled for thousands of years. Almost every house had its own dedicated bathroom and a well, with wastewater channeled through terracotta pipes into covered brick drains that ran the length of every major street. These were not open sewers but carefully engineered subterranean channels with access points for maintenance, a system designed for public health on a scale the world had never seen. This was a civilization that poured its collective effort not into pyramids for the dead, but into clean living for the masses. How did they achieve such uniformity across a region larger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia? The evidence points to a powerful, centralized authority, but one that remains strangely invisible. There are no grand palaces filled with treasure, no colossal statues of warrior kings, no grandiose royal tombs. The largest structures are not temples or palaces, but what appear to be massive public granaries and elaborate bathing complexes. This has led to a compelling theory that the true rulers of the Indus Valley were not kings in the traditional sense, but a council of engineers and urban planners. Their authority would have been derived not from divine right or military conquest, but from their demonstrated ability to manage water, to prevent floods, and to ensure public sanitation. They commanded the labor to build enormous embankments to control the unpredictable Indus River and its tributaries, and they likely oversaw the construction of vast reservoirs to store water for the dry seasons. Their power was written in the orderly flow of water through a city and the remarkable cleanliness of its streets. This silent, pragmatic genius defines the Indus Valley's unique character. It presents us with a radical idea that a complex society could be held together not by the ego of a single ruler, but by the collective agreement to follow the blueprints of a skilled, anonymous elite. The mystery of their quiet collapse is as profound as their peaceful rise, leaving behind a model of civilization that challenges our most basic assumptions about where power truly resides. Across the world in ancient China, the right to rule was literally earned by mastering the water. The legendary founder of the Xia dynasty, Yu the Great, was not celebrated as a conqueror on the battlefield, but as a tireless engineer who spent 13 years bringing devastating floods under control. His story established a powerful precedent that the act of taming a chaotic river was the highest demonstration of virtue and capability. By channeling the waters, he was seen as bringing order to the world, an achievement so profound it earned him what philosophers would later call the mandate of heaven. This was the divine permission to govern, granted not by birthright but by proven success in serving the people's most fundamental need. The ruler who controlled the water secured the mandate, and the ruler who failed lost it. This philosophy was made breathtakingly real at a place called Dujiangyan. Over 2,000 years ago, a governor named Lai Bing confronted the furious Min River, a tributary of the Yangtze that constantly flooded the fertile Chengdu Plain. His solution was a work of genius that still functions today, a system designed not to fight the river, but to guide it gently. Instead of building a massive dam to block the flow, he and his team carved a channel through a mountain to divert part of the river, creating a permanent Chinese letter, a division of the flow. They constructed a long, man-made levee in the middle of the riverbed that resembled a fish's mouth, expertly splitting the current. During the wet season, This fish-mouth divider would send about 60% of the water into the outer river to prevent flooding, while in the dry season, it would direct 60% into the inner channel for irrigation. This was engineering that listened to the river, that used its own energy and seasonal rhythms to achieve a perfect balance. It was a physical expression of Taoist principles, embracing natural forces rather than confronting them. This deep integration of engineering and cosmology meant that water management was a sacred philosophical duty. For every subsequent Chinese dynasty, controlling the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze in the south was their single greatest administrative challenge. A well-managed river meant abundant harvests, social stability, and a secure throne. A river that broke its banks meant famine, mass displacement, and a clear sign that the ruling family had lost heaven's favor. This imperative led to one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history, the Grand Canal. Stretching for over 1,000 miles, it was more than a waterway. It was the central nervous system of the empire. It linked the political capital in the arid north with the rice-producing heartlands of the south, allowing the emperor to feed his armies and move them at will. The canal was a tool of pure political control, binding the empire together economically and culturally. By integrating water management so completely into the ideology of state, Chinese civilization created hydraulic systems of remarkable resilience, structures that have endured for millennia because they were built on an understanding that to command a river, you first had to respect it. In the searing heat of the Persian plateau, survival depended on reaching the water hidden deep beneath the stone. Here, a civilization facing an unyielding sun engineered one of the most elegant solutions in history, the Qanat. This was not a canal on the surface, but a hidden highway for water, a gently sloping tunnel dug deep underground. Skilled diggers would first locate a water-bearing aquifer in the foothills of a mountain. Then, working with nothing more than hand tools and an incredible sense of grade, they would carve a channel that descended at just the right angle, allowing gravity to pull the water slowly downhill, sometimes for dozens of miles, to the arid plains below. By keeping the water enclosed and in the dark, the Qanat system prevented the massive evaporation that would have destroyed an open canal in the desert. The result was nothing short of magical, a sudden, vibrant oasis where a barren landscape had once been. This was a technology that literally made the desert bloom. But the true wonder of the Qanat was not just its engineering, but its social footprint. Building and maintaining a single Qanat was a monumental undertaking that could take generations. It required a highly organized, specialized workforce, men who knew how to dig, reinforce, and ventilate these treacherous subterranean passages. This gave rise to powerful guilds of diggers whose secret knowledge was passed from father to son. Their work was so dangerous and vital that they formed a social class of their own, the unseen architects of Persia's agricultural wealth. The Achaemenid Empire, under visionary rulers like Darius the Great, recognized the immense strategic value of this technology. They didn't just allow these projects, they actively funded and promoted the construction of Qanats across their realm. Why? Because they understood a fundamental truth: water security was territorial control. A reliable Qanat allowed them to settle, fortify, and tax remote regions that were previously uninhabitable. It turned strategic points in the harsh desert into bustling caravanserais and military outposts, expanding the empire's economic and political reach far beyond the major rivers. The Qanat was more than a water source, it was a silent, underground tool of empire building. This brilliant adaptation to environmental limits demonstrates a different kind of power, one that comes not from dominating a great river, but from a profound understanding of the hidden landscape. It is a legacy written not in stone, but in the quiet, persistent flow of water through the dark. But who were the minds behind these miracles of water and stone? The story now turns from the systems to the individuals, the forgotten engineers whose specialized knowledge made these hydraulic kingdoms possible. They were rarely independent inventors. More often, they were priests who read the stars to predict the floods, scribes who calculated slopes and volumes, or high-ranking court officials entrusted with the state's most vital resource. Their identity was a blend of scientist, mystic, and administrator. To possess knowledge of hydrology, the science of water, and astronomy was to hold a key to the kingdom's survival. This expertise was a form of power so potent it was often shrouded in ritual and secrecy. The precise formulas for a Nilometer's calibration or the correct angle for a Qanat tunnel were state secrets, guarded as closely as any military plan. This knowledge was not published for all to read, but passed down carefully through generations, from master to apprentice, or locked within certain powerful families. Think of the immense responsibility. A single miscalculation in a canal's design could lead to a city's famine. An error in a dam's construction could unleash a catastrophic flood. The pressure on these technicians was immense, yet their names are largely absent from the grand chronicles that celebrate kings and conquerors. They worked in the background, their legacy etched not on triumphal arches, but into the very contours of the land, in the straight lines of a canal and the thriving fields it watered. Their story is one of colossal, practical problem solving. It forces us to look past the throne and see the drafting table, to appreciate the human intelligence, the quiet dedication that truly built the ancient world. What does it mean that our greatest civilizations were forged not solely by the will of a ruler, but by the applied genius of the anonymous engineer? This symbolic language was carved into the very stones of power. In the cool, silent darkness of an Egyptian tomb, vibrant murals did more than decorate a final resting place. They served as a permanent resume of a ruler's earthly success. Scenes of orderly irrigation, of bountiful harvests and laden fruit trees were not just wishes for the afterlife, they were proof. They demonstrated to the gods that this individual had upheld Mat, the cosmic order, by ensuring the life-giving flow of the Nile continued for his people. His eternal prosperity was guaranteed because he had been the source of prosperity in life. This visual propaganda was equally potent in Mesopotamia. Take the common cylinder seal, a small stone cylinder engraved with a unique design. When rolled across wet clay, it left a continuous impression that acted as a signature. On these seals, rulers were frequently depicted standing beside flowing canals or holding sheaves of grain. Every time a document was sealed, a trade agreement finalized, or a tax record stored, the image stamped into the clay reinforced the same simple, powerful message. This king provides the water that gives you the bread you eat. His authority was literally imprinted onto the daily workings of the state. Perhaps the most famous example is the stele of Hammurabi. At its top, the king stands before the sun god Shamash, who is handing him the rod and ring. While these are symbols of justice and measure, they are also the precise tools used by surveyors to lay out canals and property lines. The message is brilliantly layered. Hammurabi's law, his sense of order and fairness, is directly granted by the gods and is fundamentally the same as the technical skill required to manage water justly for all. The law code inscribed below deals extensively with canals, damages from flooding, and water rights, making the connection explicit. His legal authority and his hydraulic authority were one and the same. These artifacts were not passive art, they were active instruments of ideology. They translated the complex, earth-moving work of engineers into a simple, visceral narrative that everyone, from the literate scribe to the field laborer, could understand. The ruler was not just a political leader, he was the master of the elemental force that separated life from death. By controlling the symbol of water, they secured their grip on the reality of power. The precision of these ancient waterworks was not born from guesswork, but from a quiet mathematical revolution. Behind every perfectly sloped canal and every massive reservoir was a suite of sophisticated calculations, many of which laid the groundwork for the mathematics we use today. Consider the Egyptian Harpedonapti, the rope stretchers. Each year after the Nile's floodwaters receded, these surveyors would arrive with their coiled ropes knotted at precise intervals. They used the simple, unchanging truth of a 3-4-5 triangle to re-establish perfect right angles and property boundaries across the vast, reshaped plain. By stretching a loop of rope with 12 equal segments to form a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units, they guaranteed a perfect right angle. This practical application of geometry was essential for restoring social order and ensuring fair land distribution, proving that mathematical certainty was the foundation of both justice and agriculture. This need to control water on a grand scale pushed the development of even more complex math. How do you calculate the exact slope needed for an aqueduct to flow for 50 miles without stagnating or rushing too fast? How do you determine the volume of water a new reservoir could hold? These questions demanded the nascent forms of trigonometry and integral calculus. Engineers had to compute angles and slopes with remarkable accuracy, and they developed methods for estimating volumes of irregular shapes, mentally slicing reservoirs into smaller, measurable parts to sum their total capacity. The Romans, masters of hydraulic ambition, perfected this art of precision with instruments like the chorobates. This long, wooden leveling table, sometimes over 6 meters in length, had a central groove that could be filled with water to establish a true horizontal plane. In windy conditions where water would slosh, plumb lines hanging from each end provided a backup reference. Using this tool, Roman engineers could ensure their aqueducts descended at a consistent, gentle gradient of just a few centimeters per kilometer, a feat of engineering that seems almost impossible over such vast distances. This was not random construction, it was applied physics. The ability to quantify the natural world, to predict the flow of a river and command it with mathematical certainty, represented a fundamental divide. It was this knowledge, as much as any army, that separated an advanced civilization from its neighbors. The true power behind the throne was often a set of equations scratched onto a wax tablet, the unspoken language that gave kings their command over nature itself. But this power had a razor's edge. A kingdom built by controlling water could be unmade by it just as quickly. The very systems that brought life could, when they failed, trigger a cascade of collapse. In the once fertile fields of ancient Sumer, a slow, invisible enemy was rising from the earth itself. With every irrigation cycle, mineral-laden water would seep into the soil. Under the fierce Mesopotamian sun, the water would evaporate, leaving behind a crust of salt. Year after year, this salinization accumulated, poisoning the land. Cuneiform tablets from the era tell a grim story, recording a tragic shift in their primary crop from nutritious wheat to more salt-tolerant barley, and finally to a point where even barley would not grow. The fields turned white, and the agricultural surplus that fueled their cities, their armies, and their culture simply withered away. This was not a dramatic invasion, but a quiet, creeping famine engineered by their own success. The very technology that built their civilization contained the seeds of its decline. Half a world away, the magnificent city of Ankara faced a different kind of failure, one born from overwhelming complexity. At its height, its water network was a masterpiece, a sprawling grid of reservoirs, canals, and moats that stretched across the landscape, capable of supporting 1 million people. But this intricate system required constant, meticulous maintenance. Canals had to be dredged, and the massive earthworks needed to be reinforced. Then the climate shifted. A series of intense monsoons brought floods that likely overwhelmed the canals, followed by prolonged droughts that left the vast reservoirs empty. Researchers now believe the city's brilliant infrastructure became its Achilles heel. The system was so vast and interconnected that a single failure could ripple through the entire network. The very complexity that allowed Anchor to thrive ultimately made it fragile and unable to withstand the climatic instability of the 14th and 15th centuries. The jungle did not conquer a weak city. It consumed a giant that had become paralyzed by its own sophisticated design. These stories of collapse serve as a sobering counterpoint to the tales of triumph. They reveal the fundamental risk in the ancient world's greatest gamble. The engineer's control was always provisional, a temporary victory over nature's immense power. A single miscalculation in a canal slope, a prolonged drought, or the slow accumulation of salt in the soil could unravel centuries of progress. The balance was everything. This legacy teaches us that the greatest structures of power are not always made of stone, but of systems, and that the most enduring kingdoms were those that learned to build in harmony with the forces they sought to command. This same drive to command water emerged independently on the other side of the world. In the searing heat of what is now Arizona, the Hohokam culture achieved the impossible. They looked at the unpredictable Salt River, a trickle for much of the year that could become a torrent in a flash, and saw not a barrier but an opportunity. With stone tools and sheer human effort, they carved out the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation system in pre-Columbian North America. Their networks of canals stretched for hundreds of miles, a complex web of main channels and distribution ditches that transformed the desert into a green, productive landscape. They even engineered weirs and headgates to control the flow, demonstrating a profound understanding of hydraulics. This was not a small-scale effort. It was a civilization built entirely around the precision management of water, a testament to human ingenuity in one of the most challenging environments on the continent. Far to the south, around the high, windswept plains of Lake Titicaca, the Tiwanaku people faced a different adversary, the brutal frost that could strike at any time of year. Their solution was a breathtakingly clever form of landscape engineering. They constructed vast complexes of raised fields known as suka collas. These were large, elevated planting platforms surrounded by canals. During the day, the sun would heat the water in these canals. Throughout the cold night, this stored heat would slowly radiate upward, creating a protective thermal blanket over the crops and shielding them from freezing temperatures. This system was more than just frost protection. The nutrient-rich muck dredged from the canals served as a continuous source of fertilizer. The Tiwanaku, and later the Inca who adopted these techniques, had effectively invented a way to manufacture their own fertile, climate-controlled microclimates, allowing them to sustain a large population at an altitude where agriculture should have been nearly impossible. Meanwhile, in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya contended with a paradox. Their world was one of abundant rainfall, but it was seasonal. To survive the long dry spells and support thriving cities like Tikal and Karakol, they became masters of water capture and storage. They paved large plazas to act as catchment basins, channeling rainwater through carefully sloped stone conduits into immense, meticulously plastered reservoirs. These were not mere holes in the ground, but engineered public works, with dams and filtration systems to keep the water potable for months. The survival of their entire urban society through the annual drought depended on the reliability of these hydraulic systems. What these American cultures demonstrate, in brilliant isolation from the Old World, is a universal truth: the impulse to control water, to reshape the landscape for survival and prosperity, is a fundamental thread in the human story. Confronted with deserts, high altitudes, or seasonal jungles, their engineers arrived at solutions that were every bit as creative and effective as those in Egypt or Mesopotamia. This independent genius underscores a powerful idea that the ability to command a river or a rainstorm is one of the most profound and shared expressions of human intelligence across the globe. The next great leap was to build a lake from nothing. Civilizations began to look beyond the river's edge, creating vast, artificial reservoirs that allowed them to defy the seasons themselves. These were not mere ponds, but enormous public works designed to hoard water on a colossal scale, providing a crucial buffer against drought and a shield against devastating floods. The most legendary of these was the Marib Dam in ancient Yemen. For over 1,000 years, this gigantic earthen structure, faced with stone, captured the sporadic, violent rainfall of the Arabian highlands. Its intricate sluice gates and distribution channels transformed the surrounding desert into a paradise of lush gardens and fertile fields, sustaining the wealthy Sabaean kingdom and the fabled incense trade. Its eventual collapse after centuries of service was such a cataclysmic event for the region that it is referenced in the Quran as a moment of profound societal change, a lesson in the fragility of even the greatest human achievements. Meanwhile, in Egypt, engineers executed a different kind of miracle. In the vast natural bowl of the Fayum Depression, they orchestrated the creation of Birket Karun, a massive artificial lake fed by a canal from the Nile. This was not a passive pond, but a managed reservoir, a strategic water bank for the entire region. It allowed for the reclamation of huge tracts of desert for agriculture, stabilizing the food supply and supporting a population boom. The foresight required for such projects was staggering. It demanded a deep understanding of where to place these massive structures, a knowledge of the underlying geology to prevent collapse, and the administrative power to mobilize and feed a labor force for years, even generations. A successful reservoir became the ultimate symbol of a kingdom's wealth and its commitment to the future. It meant that a society was no longer at the mercy of the next rain, but could create its own hydrological destiny. This was the final step in a long journey, the moment a civilization moved from guiding a river's flow to building its own inland sea, dictating the very terms of its survival. The true scale of these ancient megaprojects becomes clear only when we consider the army of hands required to build them. We are not talking about small teams of local volunteers, but legions of laborers, tens of thousands strong, all working in coordinated unison. How did a kingdom with no modern machinery summon such a workforce? The answer lies in a system as foundational to these empires as the canals themselves, a form of taxation paid not with grain or coin, but with physical effort. This was corvée labor, a mandatory service owed to the state. For a certain number of weeks or months each year, every able-bodied farmer, when the Nile's flood made his own fields untouchable or during the agricultural off-season, was conscripted into a national workforce. This was not optional, it was a civic duty and a tax obligation rolled into one, a debt paid with sweat and muscle. The logistical challenge of managing this human river was staggering. Before a single shovel of earth was moved, the state's administrative machine had to swing into action. Scribes calculated the exact number of workers needed, the duration of the project, and the astronomical quantities of supplies required. How do you feed 20,000 people in the middle of a desert for 3 months? Vast supply chains were established, with donkeys and barges moving thousands of tons of barley, dried fish, and beer to remote work sites. Specialized camps had to be erected to house the workforce, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. This was not chaotic toil, it was a meticulously planned military-style campaign against nature. Overseers, armed with measuring rods and progress charts, directed the labor, breaking the monumental task into manageable sections. A team might be assigned to dig just 100 meters of a 50-mile canal, their progress tracked against daily quotas. Guards were present to maintain order and prevent desertion, ensuring this human engine continued to drive forward. The project itself became a powerful tool for reinforcing the social order. The educated scribe with his stylus held authority over the laborer with his shovel, creating a visible, physical hierarchy. Yet, paradoxically, this shared, back-breaking effort also forged a collective identity. A farmer from the north and a potter from the south, working side by side to build a dam that would protect the entire kingdom, were both participating in a national endeavor. They were literally building the state with their own hands. The organization of this immense labor force was an engineering marvel in its own right, a social machine whose smooth operation was just as critical to a kingdom's survival as the flow of water it was built to command. A river's power was never merely physical, it was divine. Across the ancient world, the flow of water was woven directly into the fabric of myth, transforming the practical work of engineering into a sacred drama. In India, the descent of the Ganges from the heavens was a cosmic event of such immense force that it threatened to shatter the entire world. The god Shiva, in an act of profound grace and control, caught the raging goddess river in his matted hair, breaking her fall into a manageable, life-giving stream. This was not just a story, it was a spiritual blueprint for the entire civilization, framing the river's presence on Earth as a deliberate, divinely engineered miracle. The practical act of channeling a river's force was mirrored in this celestial narrative, sanctifying the work of every engineer who ever dug a canal. Half a world away, Greek heroes were also celebrated for their hydraulic prowess. One of Hercules' 12 labors was not to slay a monster, but to perform a feat of sanitation, redirecting 2 entire rivers to flush the unimaginably filthy Orjan stables in a single day. This was heroic strength applied not to destruction, but to purification and order, a clear metaphor for the civilizing power of controlling water. These myths served a vital purpose. They gave a cosmic meaning to the back-breaking, community-wide work of water management. The priest standing at the riverbank, interpreting the swirl of currents as a sign from the gods, was often the same individual directing where a new canal should be dug. Rituals to appease the river deity were as crucial to a project's success as the correct calculation of a slope. This fusion of the sacred and the practical granted these enormous public works an unshakable spiritual legitimacy. To challenge the King's Canal project was not just to dispute an engineering plan, it was to risk the displeasure of the gods themselves. The river was a living partner in a constant, delicate negotiation. It demanded respect, reverence, and offerings. A successful harvest was not just a result of good engineering, it was a sign of divine favor, a blessing earned through correct ritual and virtuous leadership. This spiritual dimension helps explain the sheer scale of human effort poured into these projects. People were not just building infrastructure, they were participating in a story written by the gods, a story in which their labor helped maintain the very order of the cosmos. The motivation to move mountains of earth came not only from the stomach but from the soul. So how do we piece together the story of these silent, subterranean architects? The evidence is not found in grand libraries but etched into the earth itself, waiting for the right tools to reveal its secrets. Modern archaeology has given us eyes to see this hidden world. From high above, satellite imagery and LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, are scanning dense jungles and arid plains, stripping away the veil of vegetation and sand. These technologies are like X-ray vision for the landscape, revealing the ghostly imprints of vast canal networks and field systems that are completely invisible from the ground. In places like Cambodia, LIDAR has mapped the entire hydraulic grid of Angkor, showing us a metropolis engineered for water on a scale we never before comprehended. On the ground, the work becomes far more intimate. Geoarchaeologists act as detectives of the soil, extracting deep sediment cores from ancient riverbeds and fields. By reading the layers of silt, sand, and clay like a history book, they can reconstruct the precise course of a river that shifted millennia ago, or identify the moment when irrigation began by spotting the first human-altered soils. They can even find the chemical traces of ancient fertilizers. This is the painstaking science of listening to what the land remembers. Then there are the artifacts, the everyday tools that make the past tangible. In Egyptian tombs, archaeologists have uncovered beautifully crafted wooden models of entire farming estates, complete with tiny figures operating water-lifting devices called shaddufs. These were more than toys, they were symbolic provisions for the afterlife, proving that the control of water was central to eternal prosperity. The shadduf itself, a simple counterweight lever for lifting water, and its more powerful cousin, the animal-driven sakya, were technologies so vital they appear in art and artifacts across the ancient world. Perhaps the most direct evidence comes from the inscriptions the engineers and rulers left behind. Stone stelae, erected along canal banks, were the official press releases of the ancient world. They proudly record the achievements of a king or governor, boasting of a new canal dug, a dam repaired, or a desert region brought to life. It is from these carved proclamations that we learn the names of figures like Governor Lai Bing at Dujiangyan, or the specific dimensions of a reservoir commissioned by a Mesopotamian ruler. Each broken pot that once carried water, each meticulously carved model, and each line of text on a weathered stone slab is a piece of the puzzle. Together, they form an undeniable testimony, written in water and stone, to the ambition and skill of the forgotten engineers who truly built the world. The arch and the aqueduct became the twin symbols of Roman ambition. While they drew inspiration from the Etruscans and the Greeks, the Romans perfected the art of moving water on a scale the world had never seen. Their secret weapons were a revolutionary material and an unerring eye for precision. Roman hydraulic cement, a mix of lime, volcanic ash, and rubble, could set underwater and harden into a rock-like mass, allowing them to build foundations in rivers and construct massive, leak-proof channels. Combined with the structural genius of the arch, which distributed weight so efficiently, they could stack channels high in the air, carrying water across deep valleys and over flat plains for dozens of miles. The true marvel was the gradient. Using instruments like the chorobates, Roman engineers ensured their aqueducts descended at a slope so gentle it was often impossible to perceive with the naked eye, sometimes dropping only a few centimeters over a kilometer. This was not a rushing torrent, but a slow, deliberate flow commanded entirely by gravity, a testament to their mathematical mastery. We often picture these aqueducts feeding spectacular urban fountains and public baths, and they did. But their most critical function was far less glamorous. The vast majority of this channeled water was directed to the outskirts of the city, to irrigate market gardens that fed the urban masses and to power mills for grinding grain and forging metal. This was the economic engine of Rome, all driven by a controlled, predictable water supply. For conquered territories, this engineering was a powerful tool of pacification. A newly subdued tribe might be wary of Roman legions, but the arrival of engineers offering a reliable, clean water source was a tangible, life-changing benefit. Submitting to Roman rule meant gaining access to this technological marvel. In return, the local population was integrated into the empire's economic and administrative web, their loyalty secured not just by fear but by gratitude. Managing this sprawling hydraulic network required a sophisticated legal and bureaucratic system. A special class of public officials, the aediles, were tasked with the immense job of maintaining the aqueducts, settling water rights disputes, and punishing those who stole from the public supply. The law governing water was intricate, reflecting its supreme importance. This systematic approach transformed the Roman world. Their aqueducts were more than stone conduits. They were the circulatory system of an empire, pumping the lifeblood of water to its farthest limbs. In the Roman synthesis, we see the ultimate refinement of an ancient principle, where the command of water was the purest expression of imperial power and organizational genius. Their genius was often contained in a simple wooden frame. The tools that built these hydraulic empires were not complex machines, but elegant applications of fundamental physics, mastered on a monumental scale. To lay out the perfect straight lines and precise right angles required for miles of canals, Roman surveyors relied on the groma. This instrument was essentially a cross-shaped staff with plumb lines hanging from each arm. By sighting along these weighted strings, an engineer could project perfectly perpendicular lines across any landscape, etching the blueprint of civilization into the earth itself with astonishing accuracy. For the daily work of irrigation, the shaduf became a timeless fixture along riverbanks from Babylon to Egypt. This was a simple counter-weighted lever, a long pole with a bucket on one end and a heavy weight of clay or stone on the other. With a gentle push, a farmer could lift water from the river and swing it into his canal or field. It was a tiring, repetitive task, but this humble device multiplied human effort, making it possible to water fields higher than the riverbank. A more powerful evolution was the noria, a massive water wheel often driven entirely by the river's current. Pots or buckets were attached to its rim, dipping into the flow to lift water continuously and pour it into an aqueduct high above, tirelessly irrigating vast areas without a single person pushing or an animal turning a crank. This was the power of the river harnessed to feed itself. The materials were just as straightforward, yet brilliantly effective. They fashioned durable pipes from baked clay, lined canals with stone to prevent erosion, and used natural bitumen as a powerful waterproofing agent to seal reservoirs. The true innovation was never just the tool itself, but the vision to deploy it across an entire kingdom. To coordinate thousands of shadufs along a river, or to manufacture and lay miles of standardized clay pipe, required an organizational mind that saw the potential in simplicity. This was engineering stripped to its purest form, a profound understanding of leverage, gravity, and flow that allowed them to reshape continents with little more than wood, stone, and relentless human ingenuity. A river current carries more than just water, it carries wealth. Beyond the fields they watered, these engineered waterways became the world's first and most efficient freight networks. In an age where moving a heavy load overland was a slow, arduous task, a simple barge gliding along a canal could carry the grain of 100 donkeys with a fraction of the effort. The Mesopotamians understood this power intuitively. Their vast network of irrigation canals doubled as a commercial web, linking once isolated city-states like Uruk, and Lagash into a single, integrated economic zone. A merchant in could load a boat with wool and textiles, and through this liquid highway, trade directly for the timber and stone of a northern neighbor. This was more than simple barter. It was the birth of a regional economy, all flowing along channels dug by the state. In Egypt, the Nile served as the nation's central artery. Its predictable northward flow and steady southerly winds created a perfect natural highway. A boat could float downstream with the current, and with a simple sail, beat its way back up against it. This made the river essential for the logistics of power. The pharaoh's armies could be moved swiftly to quell unrest in distant provinces. His administrators could travel the length of the kingdom to collect taxes, which were often paid in grain, and that very grain was then shipped back to the capital on the same river. The Nile barges carried the obelisks and colossal stones for the pharaoh's monuments, turning his divine ambition into stone and mortar. This ability to move goods and people cheaply and reliably was a massive, undeniable economic advantage. It concentrated wealth, fueling the growth of bustling markets in the cities and filling the state's granaries to overflowing. Who controlled these waterways? The same central authority that built them. The king who commanded the canals and the river traffic held a monopoly on commerce itself. Taxes and tolls on goods moving along these routes provided a steady, flowing revenue that funded more grand projects, more temples, and more armies. This created a powerful feedback loop where hydraulic control generated the economic surplus needed to maintain and expand that very control. The river was the original, uninterrupted supply chain, and the royal engineer was its ultimate manager, ensuring that the economic lifeblood of the kingdom never stopped pumping. These projects reshaped the world far beyond the fields they watered. Ancient engineers were not merely digging ditches, they were deliberately redesigning entire ecosystems, acting with a foresight that recognized the deep connections within a landscape. In the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, they undertook a colossal act of environmental transformation, systematically draining vast swamps to claim new arable land from the waters. This was a conscious choice to trade one habitat for another, converting a biodiverse wetland into a controlled, grain-producing plain. The consequences rippled through the local environment, altering wildlife patterns and the very composition of the soil. Half a world away, the designers of China's Dujiangyan system executed a different kind of intentional manipulation. Their decision to split the Min River was a brilliant solution to a dual problem. It prevented catastrophic flooding in the downstream plains while also reducing the destructive buildup of silt that could choke their canals. This was hydrological management with a long-term vision, an understanding that a river's burden of sediment was as critical to control as its volume of water. Every reservoir they built did more than just store water. It created an entirely new environment. These artificial lakes gave rise to vibrant wetlands, attracting new species of birds and fish, and even altering local humidity and temperature, generating unique microclimates. Yet for every positive change, there was often an unintended cost. The immense demand for timber to build sluice gates, reinforce canal banks, and fire bricks for millions of workers sometimes led to widespread deforestation on nearby hillsides. Without the anchoring grip of tree roots, soil would wash away with the rains, flowing downstream to silt up the very waterways the engineers worked so hard to keep clear. This was a stark lesson in ecological chain reactions, where a solution in one place could create a new problem in another. These ancient experts were, in essence, the first environmental managers. They operated with a sophisticated, if incomplete, understanding that they were intervening in a complex, living system. Their legacy is therefore twofold. It is found in the grand structures that still stand, and it is etched into the very contours of the land itself, a permanent record of humanity's first attempts to consciously manage the natural world. This river of knowledge flowed through two distinct channels, one spoken and the other written. In the quiet confines of temple libraries, scribes meticulously recorded formulas for slopes and volumes on durable clay tablets and papyrus scrolls. These were the ancient technical manuals, detailing everything from the proper mix for waterproof cement to the seasonal maintenance schedules for canals. Alongside them, powerful guilds of craftsmen preserved a more personal kind of wisdom. A master Qanat digger would pass the secrets of finding water and stabilizing tunnels directly to his son, not through a book but through years of shared, dangerous work underground. This was knowledge etched into muscle memory, a living library of practical skill. The survival of an entire civilization often hung on the strength of this dual transmission. Stable, long-lasting empires like Egypt maintained this sacred chain for thousands of years, their institutional memory as deep and reliable as the Nile itself. But this chain was fragile, and when it snapped, the consequences were devastating. The slow unraveling of the Roman Empire provides a stark lesson. As centralized authority crumbled and legions withdrew from distant provinces, the sophisticated administrative corps that managed the aqueducts disappeared. The specialized knowledge of how to repair a cracked cement conduit or clear a subterranean siphon was simply no longer taught. In many regions, the great aqueducts did not explode in a single cataclysm. They fell silent gradually, their flow reduced to a trickle and then to nothing as silt-clogged channels that no one knew how to clean. The technical skill to maintain them faded from memory, and communities that had thrived on piped water for centuries were forced to return to drawing it from wells and local streams. This was not a sudden dark age, but a slow dimming, a loss of comfort and scale that took generations to fully realize. The contrast with the spread of the Qanat is striking. This was a technology so robust and brilliantly simple in its core principle that it traveled. It moved along trade routes from its Persian heartland, adapted by cultures across North Africa and even into Spain. Its resilience lay in its teachable logic and its profound effectiveness in arid lands. Yet even this widespread knowledge was not immune. If a society fractured, if the guilds of diggers were dispersed by conflict or famine, the location of a Qanat's hidden mother well could be forgotten in a single generation, leaving a desert community to wonder at the source of a mysterious, dry tunnel in the hillside. This is the poignant legacy of the forgotten engineer. Their greatest structures could endure for millennia, but the sophisticated understanding that built them was a more delicate thing, a flickering torch passed carefully from one hand to the next. When that hand was forced to drop it, the light could go out for 1,000 years. The kingdom of Kush forged its power not from a single great river, but from the mastery of scarcity itself. Neighbors and sometimes conquerors of Egypt, the Kushites faced a far more unforgiving environment in the arid lands of Nubia. While the Egyptians harmonized with the Nile's predictable rhythm, the Kushite engineers had to capture water wherever and whenever it appeared, turning fleeting moments of rain into a lasting source of life. Their greatest achievement was not a canal, but a colossal stone-lined reservoir known as the Great Well at their capital city of Meroe. This was not a well in the traditional sense of a deep shaft, but a vast, open-air basin engineered to harvest the sporadic, heavy downpours that swept across the savanna. Its stone walls and paved floor were designed to minimize seepage and collect every possible drop of seasonal rainwater, creating a massive, reliable water bank in the heart of the desert. This single structure transformed Meroe into a bustling metropolis and an industrial powerhouse. With a guaranteed water supply, the Kushites could fuel the intense fires of iron production, becoming one of the primary centers of the ancient iron trade. The control of this scarce resource granted the kings of Kush a stranglehold on the region's economy. Their city sat at the crossroads of vital trade routes connecting Central Africa to the Mediterranean world. Caravans carrying gold, ivory, and exotic goods had no choice but to stop at Marae to water their animals and replenish their own supplies. The king who commanded the Great Well effectively commanded the desert's gates, taxing this flow of commerce and building a kingdom whose wealth was drawn directly from its engineered oasis. This power also extended over the nomadic tribes of the region, whose survival depended on access to these fixed, fortified water sources. Loyalty to the Kushite crown was quite literally the price of a drink. The ingenuity of Kushite water management demonstrates a critical adaptation of an ancient principle. It was not about controlling an abundance of water, but about creating abundance where none naturally existed. Their legacy, written in the stone lining of a giant reservoir, proves that the blueprint for a kingdom could be drawn in the sand, as long as you knew how to make the rain stay. But the power to give life also held the power to take it away. The same engineering genius that carved out civilizations could be weaponized, turning rivers and canals into agents of conquest and submission. When an Assyrian army laid siege to a rebellious city, their approach was as much about hydrology as it was about brute force. King Sennacherib did not merely build ramps against the walls, he orchestrated the landscape itself. He diverted existing canals and dug new ones to channel vast quantities of water right up to his enemies' gates. This water served a dual, devastating purpose. It provided a secure supply for his own massive siege camp, while simultaneously being used to undermine the city's foundations, eroding the very mud-brick walls that protected it. This was psychological warfare as much as physical, a demonstration that the king commanded the elemental forces that could either sustain a city or dissolve it into mud. The ultimate defense against such tactics was a secure, internal water source. In Jerusalem, facing the threat of an Assyrian siege, King Hezekiah ordered one of the most daring engineering projects of the ancient world. His workers carved a tunnel through over 500 meters of solid rock, secretly diverting the waters of the Gihon spring deep inside the city's walls. This subterranean aqueduct ensured that Jerusalem could withstand a prolonged blockade, its lifeblood flowing safely and invisibly from a source no enemy could poison or dam. Possessing such a hidden spring transformed a fortress into an almost unbreakable stronghold. This strategic reality made a region's entire water infrastructure a primary military objective. To capture a single critical dam was to hold a knife to the throat of every downstream community. An invader who controlled the headgates of a major canal system could plunge a fertile region into immediate drought or, conversely, unleash a catastrophic flood upon it. Victory in war was not always about defeating an army in the field, but about being the first to seize the sluice gates and reservoirs. This dark dimension reveals the ultimate duality of this knowledge. The engineer's skill, which could raise a kingdom from the desert, could just as easily be directed toward its utter ruin. The battlefield was simply another landscape where their understanding of flow and force proved decisive. A river in flood was the very definition of chaos, a formless, destructive power that erased boundaries and swept away human plans. Yet the straight line of a canal drawn with purpose across the land was the ultimate symbol of order. This was not merely a practical victory, but a philosophical one. The engineer's work was a physical argument against the unpredictability of nature, a declaration that the human mind could carve reason and predictability into a wild world. This deep-seated belief transformed every irrigation ditch into a statement of cosmic intent. In Egypt, this concept was known as Ma'at, the fundamental principle of truth, balance, and order that held the universe together. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at, and the annual, predictable inundation of the Nile, managed through his wisdom, was the ultimate proof he was succeeding. A well-ordered river meant a well-ordered cosmos. A similar idea flowed through the philosophy of ancient India, where Dharma represented the cosmic law that sustains society and the universe. A king's righteousness, his adherence to Dharma, was believed to manifest in nature itself, bringing timely rains and abundant harvests. When the rivers flowed as they should, it was a sign the ruler was in harmony with the fundamental structure of reality. This provided a profound ideological justification for the back-breaking labor and vast resources poured into hydraulic projects. Why would thousands toil for generations to build a canal? They were not just moving earth, they were participating in a sacred drama, helping their ruler align human society with the divine blueprint of the cosmos. The engineer, therefore, was far more than a technician. He was a philosopher of the practical, the individual who translated abstract concepts of cosmic order into the tangible flow of water and the growth of grain. His work brought the harmony of the heavens down to the mud of the riverbank, proving that civilization itself was an act of ordering chaos, one carefully measured canal at a time. 3 distinct rivers, 3 unique civilizations, and yet one unifying truth. If we place the ancient world's great hydraulic kingdoms side by side, a fascinating pattern emerges from the water. In Egypt, the Nile offered a predictable, gentle rhythm, a reliable partner that demanded harmony rather than domination. The Egyptian response was basin irrigation, a system of capture and release that worked with the river's natural cycle. Their primary challenge was not unpredictability, but precise measurement and timing. This environmental reality fostered a political structure centered on a divine pharaoh, an intermediary whose connection to the gods was proven by the river's perfect behavior. The state was theocratic, its authority flowing as steadily as the Nile itself. Now shift the scene to Mesopotamia. Here, the Tigris and Euphrates were wild and capricious, flooding with violent unpredictability one year and shrinking to a trickle the next. The engineering response had to be assertive, a sprawling network of canals and dikes designed to impose order on chaos. This constant, monumental struggle against the rivers demanded a different kind of power structure, not a single god-king, but a complex bureaucracy of kings, scribes, and overseers. Their authority was administrative, born from the necessity to organize thousands of laborers and settle endless disputes over water rights, as codified in laws like those of Hammurabi. Then look to China and the mighty Yellow River, whose great challenge was its immense burden of silt, which could clog channels and raise the riverbed, leading to catastrophic changes in its course. The engineering philosophy here was not about fighting the river or simply harmonizing with it, but about intelligent guidance. Systems like Dujiangyan used diversionary tactics, splitting the flow to manage both water and sediment. This relentless need for large-scale, preventative management forged a political ideology where the right to rule, the mandate of heaven, was earned and maintained through successful water control. A dynasty's legitimacy was directly tied to its engineering prowess. What is the profound commonality hidden within these vast differences? In every case, from the sun-baked plains of Sumer to the lowest highlands of China, the management of water on this scale required one thing above all else: centralized power. Whether that power was vested in a god-king, a class of bureaucratic administrators, or a philosophical mandate, the result was the same. The state, as an organizing force, emerged from the collective need to build and maintain the systems that made life possible. The specific form of government was shaped by the character of the river itself, but the underlying principle was universal. To command water was to command people, and in that command the first kingdoms were forged. This comparative view reveals the very blueprint of early civilization, a blueprint written not on parchment, but in the controlled flow of water across the land. The ghosts of ancient canals and reservoirs speak directly to our modern world. We are still grappling with the same fundamental challenges those forgotten engineers first confronted, just on a far grander and more perilous scale. Look at the colossal Three Gorges Dam in China, a project of staggering ambition that echoes the imperial will of the pharaohs. It was built to control floods and generate immense power, yet it also required the relocation of millions of people and carries unknown consequences for the river's ecosystem downstream. Or consider the American West, where the mighty Colorado River is so meticulously managed and allocated that it often runs dry before reaching its ancient delta. This is a modern version of the same salinization and over-allocation that silently crippled Sumerian fields thousands of years ago. The political conflicts are also hauntingly familiar. Disputes over transboundary water sources, like those along the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates, are the modern equivalent of city-states arguing over canal headgates, only now with nations and nuclear capabilities in the balance. These are not new problems, they are ancient dilemmas amplified by our global population and industrial power. The successes of the past teach us that large-scale environmental management requires robust, fair, and adaptable social structures. A society must be organized to maintain these systems for generations, to resolve conflicts peacefully, and to distribute the vital resource justly. Yet their failures offer an even starker warning. The slow collapse of Angkor and the salting of Sumer's fields are powerful lessons in the risks of over-engineering and the fragility of even the most brilliant systems when faced with a shifting climate. The legacy of these ancient masters is not locked in a museum. It is a living textbook. Their story compels us to ask whether we are building for the next election cycle or for the next millennium, and to remember that our own civilization's fate is still irrevocably tied to how we choose to command the flow of water. From the life-giving canals of Mesopotamia to the silent, underground rivers of the Qanat, the story of ancient power is a story written in water. These forgotten engineers, the true architects of the first kingdoms, demonstrated that the most profound authority comes not from a crown, but from the ability to command the fundamental element of life itself. They were more than just builders of ditches and dams. They were masters of a complex discipline that wove together precise science, sacred art, and the raw mechanics of politics. Their work transformed barren deserts into breadbaskets and scattered villages into unified empires, proving that human ingenuity could partner with nature's immense power to reshape the world. This legacy, etched into the very contours of our planet, speaks directly to us today. As we face our own challenges with shifting climates and precious resources, their history offers a timeless lesson in both the promise and the peril of large-scale environmental management. The triumphs and failures of these ancient water masters remind us that our civilization, like theirs, is deeply intertwined with the flow of water. We invite you to reflect on this journey, which ancient water marvel from history inspires you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining this exploration, and we look forward to seeing you on the next journey into the forgotten corners of history.